A young entrepreneur, the enslaved and freedmen whose stories we're discovering at Jolly's Mill Pond Farm. This is Unknown Black History, Part 3 of our Jolly's audio series. I'm Angie Kane. My husband Bill Kane and I are the owners of the historic Jolly's Mill Pond Farm here in Williamsburg, Virginia. And this is our mostly uncut audio series answering your questions about who we are and our mission on our farm. And now onto this unknown Black history. In part 1, I shared some of the history of the enslaved who toiled to build our earthen dam, who worked in the grist mill that was powered by the dam. And they were working side by side with black freedmen and even white indentured servants. Now, Bill grew up with this property, and it was a rustic getaway for the family for special occasions during the summertime, etc. And the family's ties go back to 1915. There was some basic history that Bill was aware of, but we really didn't understand it in a better way until years after we moved from Brooklyn. Now, the focus of this post isn't about all of the Black history because that's impossible to do in a short period of time. The focus of this post really is going to be on one man who symbolizes a part of our mission, which is to celebrate the stories of not the 1%ers, but of everyday men and women, some of whose names we'll never know, who survived and thrived on this property in this region during some of the worst periods in Black American history. But they managed to create agency and find a way. And we think these stories are very worthwhile to share and to promote. Okay. So when we first moved to Virginia, we found this historic document that was attributed to the research of a renowned local historian, Martha McCartney. But we had so much going on in the first few years that we were here, between day-to-day responsibilities with the kids and wrapping our heads around the complexity of our property. There were certain things we just had to say, okay, this looks interesting, but not now. And that's where this document fell. It was probably, I want to say it was probably at least 5 years after we first saw it that we started to take a deep dive into it. And that research laid the foundation for a lot of the Black history research we would do later on. In the document, it mentions, there's a paragraph on a man named Jeremiah Wallace. Now, in the middle of all of the things that we had going on, one day, if you can picture this, I'm standing there near my husband, hand on hip, and I say, "Oh my goodness, I'm the first Black owner of the pond." And he looked at me and said, "Oh my goodness, no, you're not." Because that man, Jeremiah Wallace, was the first Black owner of the piece of our property that contains Jolly's Mill Pond. So from what we know, he was in his late 20s, and it was around 1894 that he purchased the property from the heirs of William H. Jolly, and it is William H. Jolly who gives the pond its name, Jolly's Mill Pond. So Jeremiah Wallace purchased it from the heirs of William H. Jolly, but he only held on to it for about a year or so. And when he sold it in 1895, he also included the equipment and tools from the grist mill in the sale. We had a property line dispute that needed to be researched. So Bill spent, I don't know how much time doing deed research. And he kept coming across Jeremiah Wallace's name in all of these different real estate transactions. And what was also interesting is that he was doing a lot of transactions with people from New Jersey, New York, and his name would appear in different transactions in the Hampton, Virginia area. This was odd because you're not expecting that a young man in 1894 who is Black to be involved in basically property flipping. And it piqued our curiosity, and we were like, who was this guy? But then we couldn't find any more information about him. So it was interesting, it was compelling, but again, it needed to be put aside. Add a couple more years to this, I decided, okay, we were going to start sharing our story on social media. I picked up more of the research about Jeremiah Wallace then, and I created the social media post. And if you really, really want to dig into our archives, if you go far back enough, you'll see it. And in the post, I was just documenting this story of Jeremiah Wallace that we knew up until that point and how curious we were about who he was. He was obviously no schlub. He had to have been an educated man to have done as many real estate transactions as he had at the time. But we really had reached a dead end in our research. So in my post, I'm talking about this. And I created a graphic that included 3 photos of 3 anonymous Black men from the late 1800s. I found them in a photo archive in the public domain because my assumption was that he was an educated man who may have had some financial success. Each of these men that I included were well dressed, well coiffed, but I anonymized them. And the caption for the graphic read, "Who is Jeremiah Wallace?" So I posted it. People seemed to be intrigued, and then I moved on. Months later, I get an email from a woman, and she said she was Jeremiah Wallace's great-granddaughter. She saw that social media post, and I was so excited. I didn't waste any time before I hopped on a Zoom with my son, and we had a meeting with not just his great-granddaughter, but also one of his granddaughters. And where did they live? In the Philadelphia suburbs in New Jersey. So we're sharing information with them. I'm sharing why I found his story so compelling. And we then started to get information from them about Jeremiah Wallace. I was gleeful, and I was adamant that I absolutely positively wanted to be able to meet them in person because they were planning on coming to the Williamsburg area. And that meeting happened several months later. So I now have a picture of Bill and I in front of our farmhouse with Jeremiah Wallace's granddaughter, great-granddaughter, and great-great-granddaughter. we still keep in touch because there's more unfolding in this story. But one of the highlights of, I guess this was in late spring this year, was when I got a chance to interview one of his grandsons who was about to turn 101 years old. In the future, I'll be sharing a more in-depth story about Jeremiah Wallace, because his story is woven into the stories of significant Black figures in our regional history. And I'm also going to share how all of this then fuels our mission on our property to teach history through the vehicle that everyone loves, which is food. You can show your support by following us on social media, subscribing to all of the channels. If you're listening to this on YouTube, you'll see a link in the description to all of our social media channels. Definitely subscribe to our newsletter whenever you get the chance. And go to jollysfarmstand.com and check out our growing line of tea products. And on that site, you can also register for our upcoming culinary heritage classes. Thank you for joining us once again for this audio series on our farm, Jolly's Mill Pond Farm. And I also wanted to give you a heads up on the next part in our series. It's our episode describing some of the bureaucratic challenges that we've had on our journey. So thanks for listening, and I'll be sharing more in part 4.